10 o'clock struck. The moment had arrived for taking their places in the projectile. The necessary operations for the descent and the subsequent removal of the cranes and scaffolding that inclined over the mouth of the Columbiad required a certain period of time. Barbicane had regulated his chronometer to the 10th part of a second by that of Murchison the engineer, who was charged with the duty of firing the gun by means of an electric spark. Thus the travelers enclosed within the projectile were enabled to follow with their eyes the impassive needle, which marked the precise moment of their departure. The moment had arrived for saying goodbye. The scene was a touching one. Despite his feverish gaiety, even Michel Ardan was touched. J.T. Maston had found in his own dry eyes one ancient tear, which he had doubtless reserved for the occasion. He dropped it on the forehead of his dear president. "Can I not go?" he said. "There is still time." "Impossible, old fellow," replied Barbicane. A few moments later, the three fellow travelers had ensconced themselves in the projectile and screwed down the plate, which covered the entrance aperture. The mouth of the Columbiad, now completely disencumbered, was open entirely to the sky. The moon advanced upward in a heaven of the purest clearness, outshining in her passage the twinkling light of the stars. She passed over the constellation of the Twins, and was now nearing the halfway point between the horizon and the zenith. A terrible silence weighed upon the entire scene. Not a breath of wind upon the earth, not a sound of breathing from the countless chests of the spectators. Their hearts seemed afraid to beat. All eyes were fixed upon the yawning mouth of the Columbiad. Murchison followed with his eye the hand of his chronometer. It wanted scarce 40 seconds to the moment of departure, but each second seemed to last an age. At the 20th there was a general shudder, as it occurred to the minds of that vast assemblage that the bold travelers shut up within the projectile were also counting those terrible seconds. Some few cries here and there escaped the crowd. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, fire. Instantly Murchison pressed with his finger the key of the electric battery, restored the current of the fluid, and discharged the spark into the breech of the Columbiad. An appalling unearthly report followed instantly, such as can be compared to nothing whatever known, not even to the roar of thunder or the blast of volcanic explosions. No words can convey the slightest idea of the terrific sound. An immense spout of fire shot up from the bowels of the earth. As from a crater, the earth heaved up, and with great difficulty, some few spectators obtained a momentary glimpse of the projectile victoriously cleaving the air in the midst of the fiery vapors. Chapter 27. FOUL Weather. At the moment when that pyramid of fire rose to a prodigious height into the air, the glare of flame lit up the whole of Florida, and for a moment day superseded night over a considerable extent of the country. This immense canopy of fire was perceived at a distance of 100 miles out at sea, and more than one ship's captain entered in his log the appearance of this gigantic meteor. The discharge of the Columbiad was accompanied by a perfect earthquake. Florida was shaken to its very depths. The gases of the powder, expanded by heat, forced back the atmospheric strata with tremendous violence, and this artificial hurricane rushed like a waterspout through the air. Not a single spectator remained on his feet. Men, women, children, all lay prostrate like ears of corn under a tempest. There ensued a terrible tumult. A large number of persons were seriously injured. J.T. Maston, who, despite all dictates of prudence, had kept in advance of the mass, was pitched back 120 feet, shooting like a projectile over the heads of his fellow citizens. 300,000 persons remained deaf for a time, and as though struck stupefied. But an unforeseen phenomenon came in to subject the public impatience to a severe trial. The weather, hitherto so fine, suddenly changed. The sky became heavy with clouds. It could not have been otherwise, after the terrible derangement of the atmospheric strata, and the dispersion of the enormous quantity of vapor arising from the combustion of 200,000 pounds of pyroxyle. On the morrow the horizon was covered with clouds, a thick and impenetrable curtain between earth and sky, which unhappily extended as far as the Rocky Mountains. It was a fatality. But since man had chosen so to disturb the atmosphere, he was bound to accept the consequences of his experiment. Supposing, now, that the experiment had succeeded, the travelers having started on the 1st of December at 10h. 46 m. 40 p.m. were due on the 4th at 0h. p.m. at their destination, so that up to that time, it would have been very difficult, after all, to have observed, under such conditions, a body so small as the shell. Therefore they waited with what patience they might. From the 4th to the 6th of December inclusive, the weather remaining much the same in America, the great European instruments of Herschel, Ross, and Foucault were constantly directed toward the moon, for the weather was then magnificent. But the comparative weakness of their glasses prevented any trustworthy observations being made. On the 7th the sky seemed to lighten. They were in hopes now, but their hope was of but short duration, and at night again thick clouds hid the starry vault from all eyes. Matters were now becoming serious, when on the 9th the sun reappeared for an instant, as if for the purpose of teasing the Americans. It was received with hisses, and wounded, no doubt, by such a reception, showed itself very sparing of its rays. On the 10th no change. J.T. Maston went nearly mad, and great fears were entertained regarding the brain of this worthy individual, which had hitherto been so well preserved within his gua percha cranium. But on the 11th one of those inexplicable tempests peculiar to those intertropical regions was let loose in the atmosphere. A terrific east wind swept away the groups of clouds which had been so long gathering, and at night the semi-disk of the orb of night rode majestically amid the soft constellations of the sky. Chapter 28. Newstar. That very night, the startling news so impatiently awaited burst like a thunderbolt over the United States of the Union, and thence, darting across the ocean, ran through all the telegraphic wires of the globe. The projectile had been detected thanks to the gigantic reflector of Long's Peak. Here is the note received by the director of the Observatory of Cambridge. It contains the scientific conclusion regarding this great experiment of the Gun Club. Long's, PAK, December 12th, to the officers of the Observatory of Cambridge. The projectile discharged by the Columbiad at Stones Hill has been detected by Messrs. Belfast and J.T. Maston, 12th of December at 8:47 p.m. The moon having entered her last quarter, this projectile has not arrived at its destination. It has passed by the side, but sufficiently near to be retained by the lunar attraction. The rectilinear movement has thus become changed into a circular motion of extreme velocity, and it is now pursuing an elliptical orbit round the moon, of which it has become a true satellite. The elements of this new star we have as yet been unable to determine. We do not yet know the velocity of its passage, The distance, which separates it from the surface of the moon, may be estimated at about 2,833 miles. However, two hypotheses come here into our consideration. One, either the attraction of the moon will end by drawing them into itself, and the travelers will attain their destination. Or, to the projectile, following an immutable law, will continue to gravitate round the moon till the end of time. At some future time, our observations will be able to determine this point, but till then the experiment of the Gun Club can have no other result than to have provided our solar system with a new star, J. Belfast. To how many questions did this unexpected denouement give rise? What mysterious results was the future reserving for the investigation of science? At all events, the names of Nicole Barbicane and Michel Ardan were certain to be immortalized in the annals of astronomy. When the dispatch from Long's Peak had once become known, there was but one universal feeling of surprise and alarm. Was it possible to go to the aid of these bold travelers? No, for they had placed themselves beyond the pale of humanity by crossing the limits imposed by the Creator on his earthly creatures. They had air enough for 2 months, they had victuals enough for 12. But after that, there was only one man who would not admit that the situation was desperate. He alone had confidence, and that was their devoted friend, J.T. Maston. Besides, he never let them get out of sight. His home was henceforth the post at Long's Peak. His horizon, the mirror of that immense reflector. As soon as the moon rose above the horizon, he immediately caught her in the field of the telescope. He never let her go for an instant out of his sight, and followed her assiduously in her course through the stellar spaces. He watched with untiring patience the passage of the projectile across her silvery disk, and really the worthy man remained in perpetual communication with his 3 friends, whom he did not despair of seeing again some day. Those 3 men, said he, have carried into space all the resources of art, science, and industry. With that, one can do anything. And you will see that, some day, they will come out all right. Round THEMOON. A sequel TO. FROMTHEEARTHTOTHEMOON. CHAPTER 1. 20 minutes PASTTENTO 47 minutes PASTTEN PM. As 10 o'clock struck, Michel Ardan, Barbicane, and Nicole took leave of the numerous friends they were leaving on the earth. The 2 dogs, destined to propagate the canine race on the lunar continents, were already shut up in the projectile. The 3 travelers approached the orifice of the enormous cast iron tube, and a crane let them down to the conical top of the projectile. There, an opening made for the purpose gave them access to the aluminum car, the tackle belonging to the crane being hauled from outside. The mouth of the Columbiad was instantly disencumbered of its last supports. Nicole, once introduced with his companions inside the projectile, began to close the opening by means of a strong plate held in position by powerful screws. Other plates, closely fitted, covered the lenticular glasses, and the travelers, hermetically enclosed in their metal prison, were plunged in profound darkness. And now, my dear companions, said Michel Ardan, let us make ourselves at home. I am a domesticated man, and strong in housekeeping. We are bound to make the best of our new lodgings, and make ourselves comfortable, and first let us try, and see a little. Gas was not invented for moles. So saying, the thoughtless fellow lit a match, by striking it on the sole of his boot, and approached the burn affixed to the receptacle, in which the carbonized hydrogen, stored at high pressure, sufficed for the lighting and warming of the projectile for 144 hours, or 6 days and 6 nights. The gas caught fire, and thus lighted the projectile, looked like a comfortable room with thickly padded walls, furnished with a circular divan, and a roof round it in the shape of a dome. Michel Ardan examined everything, and declared himself satisfied with his installation. "It is a prison," said he, "but a traveling prison. And, with the right of putting my nose to the window, I could well stand a lease of 100 years. You smile, Barbicane. Have you any arrière pensée? Do you say to yourself, this prison may be our tomb? Tomb, perhaps, still I would not change it for Mahomet's, which floats in space, but never advances an inch." While Michel Ardan was speaking, Barbicane and Nicole were making their last preparations. Nicole's chronometer marked 20 minutes past 10 p.m. When the three travelers were finally enclosed in their projectile. This chronometer was set within the 10th of a second. By that of Murchison the engineer. Barbicane consulted it. "My friends," said he, "it is 20 minutes past 10. At 47 minutes past 10 Murchison will launch the electric spark on the wire, which communicates with the charge of the Columbiad. At that precise moment, we shall leave our spheroid, thus we still have 27 minutes to remain on the Earth." 26 minutes 13 seconds, replied the methodical Nicole. "Well," exclaimed Michel Ardan in a good-humored tone, "much may be done in 26 minutes. The gravest questions of morals and politics may be discussed, and even solved. 26 minutes well employed are worth more than 26 years, in which nothing is done. Some seconds of a Pascal or a Newton are more precious than the whole existence of a crowd of raw simpletons." "And you conclude, then, you everlasting talker?" asked Barbicane. "I conclude that we have 26 minutes left," replied Ardan. 24 only," said Nicole. "Well, 24, if you like, my noble captain," said Ardan. 24 minutes in which to investigate." "Michel," said Barbicane, "during the passage, we shall have plenty of time to investigate the most difficult questions. For the present we must occupy ourselves with our departure. Are we not ready?" "Doubtless, but there are still some precautions to be taken, to deaden as much as possible the first shock. Have we not the water cushions placed between the partition breaks, whose elasticity will sufficiently protect us?" "I hope so, Michel," replied Barbicane gently, "but I am not sure." "Ah, the joker," exclaimed Michel Ardan, "he hopes. He is not sure, and he waits for the moment when we are encased to make this deplorable admission. I beg to be allowed to get out." "And how?" asked Barbicane. "Humph," said Michel Ardan, "it is not easy. We are in the train, and the guard's whistle will sound before 24 minutes are over." 20, said Nicole. For some moments the three travelers looked at each other, then they began to examine the objects imprisoned with them. "Everything is in its place," said Barbicane. "We have now to decide how we can best place ourselves to resist the shock. Position cannot be an indifferent matter, and we must, as much as possible, prevent the rush of blood to the head." "Just so," said Nicole. "Then," replied Michel Ardan, ready to suit the action to the word, "let us put our heads down, and our feet in the air, like the clowns in the grand circus. No, said Barbicane, let us stretch ourselves on our sides. We shall resist the shock better that way. Remember that, when the projectile starts, it matters little whether we are in it or before it. It amounts to much the same thing. If it is only much the same thing, I may cheer up, said Michel Ardan. Do you approve of my idea, Nicholl? Asked Barbicane. Entirely, replied the captain. We've still 13 minutes and a half. That Nicholl is not a man, exclaimed Michel. He is a chronometer with seconds, an escape, and 8 holes. But his companions were not listening. They were taking up their last positions with the most perfect coolness. They were like two methodical travelers in a car, seeking to place themselves as comfortably as possible. We might well ask ourselves of what materials are the hearts of these Americans made, to whom the approach of the most frightful danger added no pulsation. 3 thick and solidly made couches had been placed in the projectile. Nicholl and Barbicane placed them in the center of the disc, forming the floor. There the 3 travelers were to stretch themselves some moments before their departure. During this time, Ardan, not being able to keep still, turned in his narrow prison, like a wild beast in a cage, chatting with his friends, speaking to the dogs Diana and Satellite, to whom, as may be seen, he had given significant names. "Ah, Diana, ah, Satellite," he exclaimed, teasing them. "So you are going to show the moon dogs the good habits of the dogs of the earth? That will do honor to the canine race. If ever we do come down again, I will bring a cross type of moon dogs, which will make a stir." "If there are dogs in the moon," said Barbicane. "There are," said Michel Ardan, "just as there are horses, cows, donkeys, and chickens. I bet that we shall find chickens." $100 we shall find none," said Nicholl. "Done, my captain," replied Ardan, clasping Nicholl's hand. "But, by the by, you have already lost 3 bets with our president, as the necessary funds for the enterprise have been found, as the operation of casting has been successful, and lastly, as the Columbiad has been loaded without accident, $6,000. "Yes," replied Nicholl, 37 minutes 6 seconds past 10. "It is understood, Captain. Well, before another quarter of an hour, you will have to count $9,000 to the President. 4,000 because the Columbiad will not burst, and 5,000 because the projectile will rise more than 6 miles in the air." "I have the dollars," replied Nicholl, slapping the pocket of this coat. "I only ask to be allowed to pay." "Come, Nicholl, I see that you are a man of method, which I could never be. But indeed you have made a series of bets of very little advantage to yourself, allow me to tell you." "And why?" asked Nicholl. "Because, if you gain the first, the Columbiad will have burst, and the projectile with it. And Barbicane will no longer be there to reimburse your dollars. My stake is deposited at the bank in Baltimore," replied Barbicane simply. "And if Nicholl is not there, it will go to his heirs." "Ah, you practical men," exclaimed Michel Ardan. "I admire you the more for not being able to understand you." 42 minutes past 10, said Nicholl. "Only 5 minutes more," answered Barbicane. "Yes, 5 little minutes," replied Michel Ardan. "And we are enclosed in a projectile, at the bottom of a gun 900 feet long. And under this projectile are rammed 400,000 pounds of gun cotton, which is equal to 1,600,000 pounds of ordinary powder. And friend Murchison, with his chronometer in hand, his eye fixed on the needle, his finger on the electric apparatus, is counting the seconds preparatory to launching us into interplanetary space. Enough, Michel, enough, said Barbicane in a serious voice. Let us prepare. A few instants alone separate us from an eventful moment. One clasp of the hand, my friends. Yes, exclaimed Michel Ardan, more moved than he wished to appear. And the three bold companions were united in a last embrace. God preserve us, said the religious Barbicane. Michel Ardan and Nicholl stretched themselves on the couches placed in the center of the disc. 47 minutes past 10, murmured the captain. 20 seconds more. Barbicane quickly put out the gas and lay down by his companions, and the profound silence was only broken by the ticking of the chronometer, marking the seconds. Suddenly a dreadful shock was felt, and the projectile, under the force of 6 billions of liters of gas, developed by the combustion of pyroxyle, mounted into space. CHAPTER2 THEFIRSTHALFHOUR. What had happened? What effect had this frightful shock produced? Had the ingenuity of the constructors of the projectile obtained any happy result? Had the shock been deadened thanks to the springs, the 4 plugs, the water cushions, and the partition brakes? Had they been able to subdue the frightful pressure of the initiatory speed of more than 11,000 yards, which was enough to traverse Paris or New York in a second? This was evidently the question suggested to the 1,000 spectators of this moving scene. They forgot the aim of the journey and thought only of the travelers, and if one of them of Team Maston, for example, could have cast one glimpse into the projectile, what would he have seen? Nothing then. The darkness was profound, but its cylindro-conical partitions had resisted wonderfully, not a rent or a dent anywhere. The wonderful projectile was not even heated under the intense deflagration of the powder, nor liquefied, as they seemed to fear, in a shower of aluminum. The interior showed but little disorder indeed. Only a few objects had been violently thrown toward the roof, but the most important seemed not to have suffered from the shock at all. Their fixtures were intact. On the movable disc, sunk down to the bottom by the smashing of the partition brakes and the escape of the water, 3 bodies lay apparently lifeless. Barbicane, Nicholl, and Michel Ardan. Did they still breathe? Or was the projectile nothing now but a metal coffin bearing 3 corpses into space? Some minutes after the departure of the projectile, one of the bodies moved, shook its arms, lifted its head, and finally succeeded in getting on its knees. It was Michel Ardan. He felt himself all over, gave a sonorous hem, and then said, "Michel Ardan is whole. How about the others?" The courageous Frenchman tried to rise, but could not stand. His head swam from the rush of blood. He was blind. He was a drunken man. Erard said it produces the same effect as to bottles of Corton, though perhaps less agreeable to swallow. Then, passing his hand several times across his forehead and rubbing his temples, he called in a firm voice, "Nicholl, Barbicane." He waited anxiously, no answer, not even a sigh to show that the hearts of his companions were still beating. He called again, the same silence. "The devil," he exclaimed, "they look as if they had fallen from a 5th story on their heads. Bah!" He added, with that imperturbable confidence which nothing could check. "If a Frenchman can get on his knees, 2 Americans ought to be able to get on their feet, but first let us light up." Arden felt the tide of life return by degrees. His blood became calm and returned to its accustomed circulation. Another effort restored his equilibrium. He succeeded in rising, drew a match from his pocket, and approaching the burner lighted it. The receiver had not suffered at all. The gas had not escaped. Besides, the smell would have betrayed it. And in that case Michel Arden could not have carried a lighted match with impunity through the space filled with hydrogen. The gas mixing with the air would have produced a detonating mixture, and the explosion would have finished what the shock had perhaps begun. When the burner was lit, Arden leaned over the bodies of his companions. They were lying one on the other, and in it mass, Nicole above, Barbicane underneath.